Yar, you be listening to the hero's journey. Ye be hearing the voice of Captain Jeff.
And I be Daniel Greybeard, me mateys.
Let the journey begin, says I.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Hero's Journey, where we discuss your favorite books and movies through the lens of Joseph Campbell's monomyth, as well as Christopher Vogler's modern cinema-focused adaptation.
Over the last 5 years and more than 60 episodes, we have covered some truly wonderful stories, loved by audiences, respected by critics, sometimes both. This episode, we thought we would do a fun little experiment. Take a look at box office bombs, films that might not necessarily be bad, but for whatever reason failed to find an audience, failed to impress the critics.
Our criterion for selection was that the film's production budget had to exceed the total global box office earnings as stated on imdbpro.com.
Yeah, which is why Waterworld, a film wished for by several fans, as well as myself, was not on that list. That film's bloated production budget was $175 million. This was in 1990-something dollar bills, we're talking.
Yikes.
And still managed to earn $264 million worldwide. So therefore, we had to strike it from the list. But worry not, Mariner fans. I will find a way to get this film on a poll in the future. Jeff, was there a film that you had hoped to put on the poll, but it failed our selection criterion?
Quite honestly, no. When I, for some reason...
Come on, pick a side.
For some reason, when I thought about biggest box office bombs, I had heard just like buzzing in the industry that Cutthroat Island was the one. So that was kind of the one that I always had in the back of my head that we were going to end up doing. So when it got selected, I was like, there you go. Something went to my expectations for once.
Wow. All right. Well, we've got a turkey to roast. What made the poll this time?
In third place with 18% was Hudson Hawk. If that had won, we would have had 2 Bruce Willis movies in a row. And the runner-up is Kevin Costner's The Postman, which had 29% of the vote. And if that had won, we would have had 2 Olivia Williams films in a row.
I saw The Postman in the theater. I loved it then. I love it now. I will not apologize.
You know, I didn't see it, and doesn't it have Will Patton in it?
It does.
The Postman.
The Postman.
We should
You
watch The Postman.
spelled tyranny wrong.
Well, the winner of our box office bombs poll with 53% of the vote,
Cutthroat Island.
which no one talks like that in the movie. I don't know why I'm talking like that.
I mean, that was the number one, the biggest disappointment of the film. I guess Frank Langella was the one who went closest to the stereotypical it's the pirate voice.
Well, there's a guy with the peg leg.
Cutthroat Island was released December 22nd, 1995, at the beginning of a long Christmas weekend. Jeff, there was treasure to be had. But Cutthroat Island was dead in the water, ranking 11th, earning just $2.3 million opening weekend.
Oh.
The film's earnings sank deeper from there, and in its 6th and final week in theaters, the film was ranked 35 and captured less than $200,000. Total global box office earnings were just $10 million. A dreadful sum for a film with a production budget of $98 million. This
Holy
movie
cow.
lost a ton.
Directed by Rennie Harlin, Cutthroat Island stars Harlin's then-bae, Gina Davis, as Captain Morgan Adams. This is Gina's second appearance on the podcast after Thelma and Louise, which we covered in February this year. That seems like 10 years ago.
It really does.
Matthew Modine appears as Morgan's slave, William Shaw, and Frank Langella chews the scenery as the villainous Dog Brown, a role he says is one of his favorites, even though he says the film itself is the worst one in which he has ever appeared. So honest.
No awards considerations at all beyond Rennie Harlin's nomination for a Razzie. I'm not sure there's any need for further preface here, Jeff. Ready to set sail, Captain.
Weigh anchor, catch the wind, and shiver me timbers. This be the hero's journey of Cutthroat Island.
Dead podcasters tell no tales. Act 1 of the hero's journey begins with the world of common day. We see our main character in their status quo normal life. The year is 1668. Piracy is on the rise in the Caribbean, proliferating into a period historians would later dub the Golden Age of piracy. On the island of Jamaica, or Jamaica, we meet Morgan Adams, played by Gina Davis, as she dresses herself after a romantic encounter with Kenny G. We note that she does not put on... I'm sorry.
Kenny G is a French Kenny G.
We note that she does not put on a dress as one might expect of ladies of that time period. She dons simple brown pants and a waistcoat. Lieutenant Kenny G suddenly produces a flintlock pistol and aims it at her, expressing his intent to turn her in to the governor of Port Royal for a bounty for the arrest of Morgan Adams the pirate. And though offended, Morgan displays her situational awareness and cleverness by showing that her monkey has stolen the lead shot, the round ammunition used by flintlock weapons, out of Lieutenant Kenny G's pistol. And she offers the first major groaner of the script.
By the way, that won't work. See, I took your balls.
I took your balls.
Yeah.
Jeff, that's the kind of movie this is. 6 people have writing credit on this film. And
yeah.
Strap in, ladies and gentlemen. We've got 124 minutes of this. However, okay, so despite the goofiness of this scene, we learn that Morgan Adams is a wanted pirate, is not afraid to put herself in danger to get what she wants, and also takes precautions to limit her exposure. So those are the things that we learn about Morgan in this scene. As this is happening, we're hearing a man's voice from outside calling, "Morgan! Morgan!" Which leads us to...
the call to adventure. The hero is presented with a challenge that renders them unable to continue living in the comfort of their ordinary world. There's a lot of plot to cover here. 2 members of Morgan's crew, Mr. Glasspool, played by Stan Shaw, and Bowen, played by Christopher Masterson, interrupt Morgan's post-coital punning, as you mentioned.
Very nicely done.
To summon her to her father's aid. Her evil uncle Dog has captured her father. So she rides her horse across the ocean. It's just like, I realize it's a sandbar, but she rides her horse in the water for a good 300 yards.
Painting the desperation of the situation, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I guess what I'm saying is at this point,
what's she going to do? Get off the horse and then wade through 300 yards of ocean to get, come on.
Well, she rides to a boat, which she could have just accessed from the beach. Look, I'm just saying that.
How's she going to access it from the beach? She's got to ride to the horse. Jeff, there are a lot of nits to pick in this movie. This is not the one you need to.
I beg to differ.
Fly your flag from.
The filmmakers chose to spend a lot of my suspension of disbelief in the first 2 minutes of this film. I was already like, okay, give me something I can hang on to here.
It was just for the sake of, this will be cool.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I got it. She's riding it, and wow, this sandbar's really long. Wow, okay, all right. She's still riding the horse in the ocean.
By the way, this movie, as I said earlier, is 124 minutes long. It would be about 89 minutes long without all of the completely unnecessary slow-mo that this film employs.
Right.
Okay, I will leave you alone about the boat now. Please,
okay.
Continue.
So she steals a dinghy and rows off to rescue her father. We learn that evil Uncle Dog, by the way, can we just talk about how it's the Addams family? Like, the whole movie takes place about the Addams family. I could not stop thinking about that. So
I didn't even pick up on it because none of them are named Adams except for Morgan.
Right. And anyway, her evil Uncle Dog has already killed their brother, her uncle Richard, in order to get his piece of a treasure map. And now he's making Morgan's father, Black Harry, walk the plank in an attempt to extort him for his piece of the map. But Harry points to his head and says, "It's up here." And then he jumps overboard with the anchor tied to his leg. Morgan arrives just in time to rescue him, but Dog's first mate, Snellgrave, now that's a great pirate name.
That is a good pirate name.
Gets a shot off with his flintlock and hits Harry in the shoulder. Morgan drags him to shore, where Dad reveals to Morgan with his last few gasping breaths that his portion of the map to Cutthroat Island is tattooed on his scalp. He says, "Shave my head. Leave Dog be. Don't go revenge me upon Dog. Take my ship, the Morning Star, make her crew your own, and find your other uncle, Mordecai, and get his portion of the map." So in his dying breath, he's calling her to this adventure of finding the rest of the map and getting the treasure.
Yes.
And then she, off screen, thank God, she literally scalps her father's corpse. And for the rest of the film, she's flinging around this slightly hairy flap of human head leather. It's just gruesome. At one point, she hands it to Shaw, and he's like, "What? It's just little hairs. This is just disgusting."
What is this, pigskin?
Oh, yeah. So this is Morgan being called to the adventure of finding the treasure of Cutthroat Island.
Yeah, it is a lengthy call to adventure sequence.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you get a walking of the plank in the first 5 minutes, so. The next segment is refusal of the call. Confronted with fear of the unknown, the call to adventure is refused, either directly by the hero. Sometimes external forces work to repel the hero. Now, this scene that you were just discussing also includes refusals of the call. Morgan is refusing her father's offer to take the ship and the crew, insisting that he will be fine.
Yes.
Harry says, "No, the Morning Star is yours." And Morgan again rejects, says, "No, don't say that. I've patched you up with worse."
Yeah.
So she is refusing to accept the situation that her father has now been mortally wounded and is dying, and trying to pass the torch to her, and she's not accepting it.
Yes, totally agree.
That was the major refusal. There's one a little bit later, but I don't want to talk about it yet because it's jumping too far ahead in the story. I think it takes place in a different segment of the journey. So that's the major refusal within the sequence of events as we have experienced them so far.
I have two more, and if they're the ones you're about to talk about, you can just delete this. Right after this scene, Morgan is drunk in the hold of the ship with the writer, John Reed, who is sailing with the pirates so he can gather stories. And she's drunk, which is another refusal because she's refusing to accept the immediacy of this adventure she has to be on. And he's telling her, "Don't go on this quest. You're free now. Come to London with me." He's tempting her away from this call that she's been presented with. And then even her monkey, King Charles, refuses to obey her orders. She actually, no. I'm going to reverse my stance on that. He does what's best for her by dropping the rum. She says, "Bring me my banner." And the monkey, instead of bringing her the rum, drops it and smashes it. So I'm going to reverse my. King Charles is helping her. He's helping her to stay sober so she can go on this adventure.
King Charles. Okay, so that's a meeting with the mentor moment then.
Oh, that's a good point.
Meeting with the monkey.
Meeting with the monkey. The hero receives counsel from a primate on how to operate in the special world. I have so little for this segment that I'm going to say that the monkey thing that I just said on purpose, that is absolutely mentorship. The monkey saying, "Don't drink, stay sober, go after your map." So I had down here that during that scene, the call to adventure scene that we both identified where Dad says, "Scalp me." He's giving her advice, telling her not to go revenge herself. He's inspiring her. And of course, the map itself is a kind of supernatural aid. It is a tool that the hero will use on their adventure. And then there are some scenes with Glasspool, one in particular where when she's drinking with John Reed and the monkey, he comes down and says, "Important things are happening overhead and you should be there." This is
Agreed.
Glasspool's way of saying, "Hey, you got to step up here. You can't be the frivolous pirate's daughter drinking and cavorting. You have to take on a leadership role here." So that's what I had for meeting with the mentor, but mostly the monkey thing, like I said.
Yeah, I agree. I think Mr. Glasspool and later Mr. Blair, they both provide mentorship and assistance in the unusual, the uncommon environment of a female captain.
Yeah.
At this time in history, this was incredibly rare. There were like 2 or 3 female pirates of note, Anne Bonny, Mary Read, and a third one whose name escapes my memory. But a female pirate captain was unheard of. So when John Reed, the author, in something of a refusal of the call, says to Morgan, come to London, these men aren't going to follow your orders.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little bit of mentorship as well. Just saying you're entering an unpleasant world. Going back to her father, Black Harry, and the skull map.
Head leather.
So as grotesque as it is, there's symbolism in the fact that the map was tattooed to his scalp, part of his head, therefore representing a father's wisdom. Morgan also now carries a literal piece of her father around with her everywhere she goes, rather than just his memory or acting in his spirit.
Just
we talk often about this segment, the supernatural aid meeting with the mentor segment, also being where the hero is given the weapon or the special information knowledge needed to succeed in their quest. And you're not a pirate captain without a ship and a crew. So father bequeathing the Morning Star and her crew.
And a treasure map. I mean, that you got to have that to be
Morgan.
A pirate too, right?
You've got the 3 major elements of pirate movie.
Yeah.
Here now. This brings us to the final segment of Act 1, crossing the first threshold. The hero must pass a barrier to enter the special world of the adventure. This crossing represents the hero's commitment to taking on that adventure. As you've already discussed, Mr. Glasspool has alerted Morgan to the discussion happening on the deck of the ship and that she really needs to be there. As we join the men on the ship, Mr. Scully, played by Jimmy Skaggs, makes his bid for the captaincy of the Morning Star. He says, I'm not one to speak ill of the dead, but Harry didn't get us anywhere, and trust me to lead this ship. Morgan, who was perfectly dry below decks, appears on deck completely drenched. I think there was a scene missing here. Does the monkey douse her with a bucket of water? Or
yeah, I would say Glasspool tries to sober her up or something by splashing water on her face.
Anyhow, she appears on deck and says,
I stand for captain. My father wished it. As he died, he gave me this. He left it for all of you.
That's his bloody scalp.
It's a map to Cutthroat Island. The buried treasure of a Spanish gold ship. More gold, jewels, and plunder than you've ever dreamed of.
The text on the map, however, is written in Latin, so their first task is to find a translator. She thinks there's a good chance they'll be able to find one in Port Royal. Now remember, Port Royal is also where Morgan Adams is wanted for piracy, with a large bounty on her head. So again, Morgan exercising that trait of not being afraid to put herself in danger to get what she wants. And so Morgan draws her hilted dagger, embeds it in the mast, and says,
Let any man who would challenge me draw that.
And with no takers, we cut to a change of location, the swelling of John Debney's score indicating the transition into Act 2.
Heck yeah.
Have you anything to add, Jeffrey?
I just wanted to note that, I was very confused by the names in this movie. So we're to believe that there are 4 brothers, Harry, Richard, Mordecai, and Dog. Okay, let's just say that Dog is a nickname. His name is not Dog. But Harry, Richard, okay, Mordecai? Well, they got oddly biblical there in a minute, and their last name is Adams. That's just a weird, their parents were confused about naming conventions. Put down the pipe, okay? Mom and Dad Adams, Grandpa Adams. Wow.
You know, you don't know the age differential with these guys. They might not all be sons of the same mother. They might.
I'm just saying, no wonder Mordecai was a drunk and tried to get away from the others.
Somebody might have had a life-changing experience that suddenly defined the way they wanted to name their next son.
It's a lot of backstory, man.
Seize your oar and row to shore for a drink at the Campbell Cafe.
That's good.
From the director of Cliffhanger. Here she comes. And Die Hard 2 comes the action-adventure event of the season.
Open fire!
Cutthroat Island, rated PG-13. Starts Friday, December 22nd.
Listeners, welcome to the Campbell Cafe. God, this is good coffee. Dan, what have you been watching, reading, playing, enjoying?
This last month was chock full of mostly just me finishing my Dead Space Let's Play on YouTube. I wanted the finale to air on Halloween, so most of my time was spent doing the playthrough and then putting together the videos and all of that stuff. I did, however, read Kim Stanley Robinson's new book. Normally, he is a novelist, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
But he wrote a book called The High Sierra, a love story, published earlier this summer. And it is a memoir / history of the Sierra Mountains. Robinson has been a big fan of hiking and backpacking in the Sierras. The first time he ever went was with, and here's where it's going to sound real familiar, was when he was a teenager, and he and his friends went backpacking in the Sierras. And that same group of friends still today meets up for trips, even though they have in some ways scattered across the country now. But they will find ways to get together every now and then and do a backpacking trip in the Sierras. Kim Stanley Robinson is an environmentalist, a conservationist, an ecologist. If you read any of his novels, there is a heavy focus on humanity's effect on its environment.
Yeah. Major
theme in all of his books, and it comes through here again in this memoir, The High Sierra. I absolutely loved it.
Wow.
He bounces between memoir of various trips that he took, then short, somewhat biographical chapters of people who in history who have been important to the mountain range and its surroundings, and then chapters that deal with geology and how the mountains were formed over history and why the Sierras are so special in terms of mountain range, because they are at a specific elevation and a specific proximity to the ocean, and how that affects the terrain and the fauna. And it was a fascinating book. And his love for the Sierras came through. I mean, the subtitle, A Love Story, is apt.
Wow.
If you like Kim Stanley Robinson, I think you'll like this book, even though it's not sci-fi. If you like books about the environment, I think you will like this book. Highly recommend.
Wow, that's what an unusual offering there.
Then my wife introduced me to a Belgian film that she watched a few years ago, and it really had an impact on her. So she had me watch it. The title, forgive my pronunciation, Jean Dillman, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles.
Okay.
So that translates to Jean Dielman, this is the main character's name, 23 Commerce Way, Brussels. The title is just her name and address. Very unusual title for a film. The film itself is also very unusual. Long, stagnant shots of her doing mundane things like making a pot of coffee, taking a bath, entering a room, turning the light on, doing a task, turning the light off, exiting the room, closing the door. And you watch this for a day, and you become hypnotized by the repetition in her behavior, and you begin to anticipate her behavior when she enters a new room in her apartment.
Okay.
And you begin to feel comforted by the fact that you have successfully and accurately predicted the actions she was going to take when she enters this particular room. And you become lulled into this sense of safety in your deciphering of this woman's human behavior.
Okay.
And then one time she walks into a room and she does something a little bit differently. and that throws you. Suddenly you're not just watching this woman living her life. Now you're watching something that is unsettling because you don't know what else she's going to do differently. And what does that mean? Where's that going to lead? Really interesting movie.
Well, you've pitched it in a fascinating way.
And you, Jeffrey, what have you been up to?
Like you, I have mostly been being on the creation side of things that others will read and watch. But the thing that has occupied most of my entertainment over the last month, quite honestly, is your playthrough of Dead Space on No Games for Old Men.
Like and subscribe.
As with Critical Role, which is the Dungeons and Dragons show that Dan introduced me to and campaigned for me, pun intended, to watch for a year and a half until I finally got into it. When Dan explained to me that he was going to become a video game streamer, I just had no relationship to why anyone would want to watch someone else play a video game. But because he's my friend, I decided to try it, and it has two it works on several levels. On one level, it's like I'm 13 again and I'm at Scott's house watching someone else play a video game over their shoulder, trying to live vicariously through their play because it's not my turn yet.
Yeah. Waiting for the controller to be passed to you.
But then there's this other element that Dan is a very strategic and methodical game player. So as I'm watching Dan play this video game, which is if you imagine the movie Alien, it's a space horror movie. So the main character, Isaac, is isolated on this spaceship that is haunted by alien zombies, essentially. And I hate horror and I hate zombies. And yet every morning I would get up and I would look forward to, after I drop my kids off from school, I have about 20 minutes where I sit down and eat breakfast. And I would eat and watch this horrifying alien stomping monster game. And it's just fascinating to watch the way Dan plays and the decisions he makes, even the things where he goes to the shop and like has to upgrade weapons and decide what ammo to buy. I just found it fascinating. And then I've seen it seeping into my own gameplay, because when I would come up against, I was just finishing Rise of the Tomb Raider. And I'd come up against this boss battle and go, okay, wait, what would Dan do? WWDW. WWDD. What would Dan do? Yeah. And so I was more methodical and less panicky, and it improved my game experience. So I've been enjoying that. So if you
That's awesome.
Even if you've never watched a streamer before and the idea of watching someone else play a video game sort of sounds lame to you, give it a try. Go to No Games for Old Men on YouTube. And I recommend his playthrough of Mutant Year Zero, which is a more slow-paced, like strategic turn-based game, and then Dead Space, which is a third-person shooter hunting through scary alien ship. And they're both very funny, and Dan's, as you have experienced on this podcast, is a charming and funny host. So to hear him narrate his winnings and failings during video games is quite amusing and enthralling. I recommend it.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you saying that. That's very, I'm chuffed.
Well, unless you have anything else to say, let's get back to our grog and tog.
What's tog?
Togging. We're togging about pirates.
Oh, tog. Okay.
Grog and tog. I don't know. I'm making stuff up now.
Okay.
Act 2 of the hero's journey begins with tests, allies, enemies, aka the road of trials. Our hero is now in the special world of the adventure, and they make allies, meet enemies, and they must pass a series of tests to prove their worthiness. The allies of Morgan Adams, the piratess hero, Mr. Glasspool, her first mate, who we've already mentioned, Mr. Blair, her quartermaster, Bowen, who's like her young crew member, like an ensign, maybe? Do we ever get his rank? I'm not sure. He's the Wesley Crusher of the Morningstar.
Exactly.
Then we have King Charles the Monkey, who is her ally. And then I would argue her father, Black Harry, is both ally and mentor, but he dies fairly early on, and then she removes his scalp.
You really hung up on that.
Yeah, it was gruesome, but funny.
But funny.
Enemies would be her Uncle Dog and his crew, including his first mate, Snellgrave. What a great name. And then we have Ainsley, the governor of Port Royal, and his British regiment of soldiers.
Yep.
Quite a few shapeshifters in this movie.
Yes.
William Shaw, Matthew Modine's character, a a swashbuckling romantic co-lead. He's a thief who pretends to be a doctor so he can steal jewels from guests at a party. That's how we meet him. And he ends up being a quite crucial part of the story. Scully, Morgan's turncoat crew member, who tries to claim captain at the top of the film and then sort of fades back into the crew and is seemingly loyal to her and then later betrays her. Captain Trotter, Ainsley's regiment lapdog, has an important twist later in the Trotter. John Reed, the writer, betrays her to the regiment.
He had a nice coat. I liked his coat.
Oh yeah, he's got a good coat. And then there's Uncle Mordecai, who very briefly and rapidly turns from potential adversary to ally when she meets him and challenges him with a gun, and then he agrees. Tests. Boy, there are a lot of tests. The first one, which you mentioned in an earlier segment, is finding a man who speaks Latin to decode the map. They're walking through Port Royal. She's dressed up as a lady, and Bowen says he's found a man who speaks Latin, but he's about to be sold as a slave. She goes to the prison with Glasspool and meets William Shaw. He's a Latin-speaking thief with a foot fetish who claims to be a doctor. After a failure...
Did Quentin Tarantino do an uncredited rewrite on this film?
Must have. Just such a weird moment where he says...
Muy bien, yes. Et pedes levare volo.
What did you say?
You're a very beautiful woman. I'd like to wash your feet.
Interesting opening salvo. After failing to win him at auction, she stabs the man bidding against her right in the butt, and they take Shaw. So that's a pass. Meanwhile, John Reed has excused himself from the company to go, quote unquote, deal with his bookseller. We find out later what's happening to him. The next test is escaping Port Royal. So the regiment catches up with Morgan. She's a wanted woman, and she escapes with Shaw, and they're fleeing explosions. This was a fun sequence. This is where I really started to enjoy the goofy action movie pirate hybrid. It's kind of a hybrid action movie / pirate sequence, because you've got swinging from ropes and pulleys and falling through scaffolds and giant explosions.
And Shaw is quipping through the whole thing.
I'm in favor of exercise, but you owe me an explanation.
Yeah, it's very action movie. And I will say there are some stunts in this sequence that are so unbelievably bad. I can't believe they weren't left on the cutting room floor. They're on this rooftop and they have to escape downward. And so they jump onto this scaffold and they fall through each layer of this scaffold in like half speed. Like it's clearly... that they're clearly being suspended by ropes because they don't fall fast enough.
Right.
And, instead of showing close-up shots of them bursting through pieces of wood and stuff, it's like this wide shot of them just falling. It's terrible. There's this stunt where she hits somebody with a shovel and it just looks like something from a student film. Like the shovel doesn't move and the guy, it's bad. But my favorite mini sequence is she's standing up, she's driving the horses on this carriage, and then he takes the reins and she's on the back trying to kick somebody off, and then they get to this, they're going under this like awning, and she has to jump up on the roof and run through these shops and then jump back out the other window and onto the carriage. I really liked that. I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
And afterwards,
apparently Gina Davis did that stunt herself.
Wow.
Yeah, because she's got to like jump out a window, roll down an awning onto and land on the seat of the carriage as it emerges.
That was a good stunt. Meanwhile, one of the regiment's ships starts launching cannonballs, which aren't just cannonballs that tear holes in things. They cause giant explosions.
Yes,
so
they're exploding shot.
They are leveling this port city in fire explosions.
I was confused about the wisdom of this. They're shelling their own city to catch one pirate.
Yeah.
And they are putting in grave danger the cavalry that are close behind.
Yeah, dozens
Every
of
explosion
people.
probably does more damage to the horses and British troops that are in pursuit.
Yes, it is a ridiculous, hey, let's have explosions, and there's a lot of running from fire and riding horses away from fire. But the point of the sequence is we see what a badass Morgan is. And
right.
Shaw is starting to fall in love with her a little. He has this great line where he looks at her and he says,
"You're more active than other women I've known."
And I thought,
Yeah.
What a terrible line of dialogue, and what a great meal Modine made of it. It's just a great...
Oh, I loved it.
So this is a pass. They escape, but they've drawn the attention of Governor Ainsley, the foppish military governor who knew of Morgan's father and is now focusing his attention on her.
Who was that woman?
Morgan Adams, sir. You've 100 pounds on her head.
Black Harry's girl. Well. Well, she's made a proper fool of me, ain't she? 200 pounds and a captaincy for you if you find her for me.
Oh, sir.
The next test is decoding the map. Shaw and Morgan are riding in this carriage with terrible rear projection technology, making it obvious that they're on a soundstage. This is that weird time in the 90s where they were still using that sometimes.
Yeah, like even in T2.
Yeah, but Pulp Fiction came out the year before this, and they used it ironically, like in a very obvious 70s way. So that it was an interesting time for film where it was like they were parodying a technology that was still being used. It was just really interesting to me that they used it here. So she uses a dagger on the map and sees that the writing is backward.
Why is the dagger, though? Why is there a dagger?
A balls. She's pointing it at his balls.
She's going to stab Shaw in the nuts. What is with this lady?
She's got, I think the screenwriters assumed that all women want to cut men's balls off. I think that maybe projecting.
We want to point that out. 6 men were credited for writing this movie, and one of them, minimum, said, let's have this woman pirate just stab dudes in the nuts for 2 hours. And none of the other 5 said, maybe once. Maybe once.
Yeah. Maybe the balls joke covers it for the movie. Maybe we just leave the balls joke.
They just went full tilt.
While she's about to stab him in the balls, the dagger shows a reflection of the writing, and she realizes the writing is backwards. And there are psalms written along the edge of this map. And we find out this is a code, but it's a riddle she can't solve yet. So this is a pass and a fail. It's a pass because she's discovering a clue, but it's a fail because she doesn't decode. I have a question for you about the psalms on this map.
Yeah.
Were we to understand that the psalms were numbered, or that Shaw just knew which psalms they were by knowing them because he's a smart guy? Because I didn't see numbers on the map, so it made me think, does he just know the psalms by heart because he's studied the Bible in his education?
He's a religious man. I don't know. I couldn't really see well enough. Also, the psalm numbers may have been hidden by the remaining little scraggly stubble hairs that were sticking up from Black Harry's scalp.
Gross.
That may have been it.
Oh, God, that's so disgusting. Also, during this sequence, Ainsley extorts John Reed into delivering a message to Morgan: cut me in on the treasure or hang.
Yeah.
And this is a failure of John Reed to stand up for Morgan. Now, John Reed's not a hero, but if this is a test, he certainly fails it. Next test, looking for Brother Mordecai in his portion of the map. Finding the portions of the map are the steps of the quest before you can find the artifact. Pretending to be a lady of the night, Morgan enters a tavern of ill repute and finds her uncle, Captain Mordecai, who holds the third part of the map. And she threatens him with a gun holstered beneath her dress, and then recruits him to join her and find the treasure. She persuades him. So that's a pass. Now they have to escape Dog again. Another test. So Dog and his crew catch up to Morgan and hers and demand that she hand over her portion of the map. And she gets sassy with him, and he threatens her with one of the shrieking eels. So let's talk about that eel prop for a minute. That is the funniest, least scariest eel thing I've ever seen.
It looked so similar to the shrieking eels from Princess Bride that I wonder if they just got the same prop out of the warehouse.
This movie seemed to be trying to capture some of the tone of Princess Bride in places. I flashed back to Princess Bride, but I will say I haven't seen any long previews of the new Little Mermaid movie, but I think they should bring those props back for the live-action Flotsam and Jetsam. Fingers crossed. So Shaw, with Bowen's help, makes a gunpowder trail as part of a distraction and knocks over a candle and starts this trail of fire along the gunpowder, and then explosions are happening and it's a distraction, and a tavern brawl sword fight ensues. And again, if you forgive some awkward stunts, this is another fun action sequence. It's just pirates fighting and
swinging on chandeliers. You have to have a tavern brawl. Mandatory.
It's swashbuckling. Yes, agreed. So in the melee, Mordecai falls, and Shaw finds him and pries the third portion of the map from his cold death grip, and the map is burned into the lid of an ale keg. So they escape, but not before Morgan takes a musket ball to the side. So this is a pass, but with consequences.
Yes.
I think there's one more test here. You could put it in approach, but I think it's a final test, which is they're still escaping the tavern scene, and Morgan spots a palmistry sign with numbers on the palm and figures out that the psalm numbers on the scout map represent the longitude of Cutthroat Island, and that is a pass.
Right.
That is the end of tests.
Did you mention that Shaw is hiding the portion of the map that he took from Mordecai and is not admitting that he has it, but that Morgan saw him take it, and so she knows he has it?
I haven't gone there yet, but that's absolutely correct.
Yeah, he tucks it away and tries to escape the tavern himself.
Yeah, and hides it under the seedy thing, which is what he refers to its hiding place later. It was under the seedy thing.
The seedy thing.
I thought that was a great line.
I have the final test as Morgan drawing the longitude line on the map and determining at least a general area where they need to go to find Cutthroat Island as the final test, sharing that information with Blair and Glasspool, and then fainting.
I'll buy that.
From loss of blood. And then the clumsy romantic scene as Shaw performs surgery on Morgan to extract the lead shot from her hip.
Interesting.
And her attempting to get Shaw to admit that he has Mordecai's share of the map.
Interesting. I guess I could buy that a little bit out of sequence. I guess I saw the romantic moment as, sometimes approach has a breather as the characters prepare for a battle. And to me, that scene was their approach to the romantic ordeal that's about to happen, a very romancing the stone kind of romantic ordeal. And also the healing up of a wound before an ordeal, because they're literally in the ship on the way to the island, which is where the literal inmost cave is. So I painted those as approach. But approach is your category, so go for it.
Well, I was wrapping up my final test there, and it would be a failed test because Morgan fails to convince Shaw to, even after acquiescing to his request for kissy face, he still says, I don't have it, the map. So she fails that. Okay, let us cut now to approach to the inmost cave. The hero reaches the edge of a dangerous place where the object of their quest is hidden. Aboard the Reaper, this is Dog Brown's ship, Dog is discussing their options with his lieutenants. He sees what Morgan's plan is, to draw them, the Reaper being a heavier ship, into shallow water in the hopes that they will run aground on coral reefs.
Right.
Also, a storm is approaching. Dog says that they will go around the island and ambush Morgan on the other side in the morning.
Yes.
The weather is getting rough. The tiny ship is tossed. Below decks,
if not for the crew of the fearless Morning Star,
the Morning Star would be lost. All right. Below decks, Shaw uses Mordecai's map and determines the latitude of Cutthroat Island. Morgan, though, is hiding in the dark and ambushes Shaw and tells Shaw that she's going to maroon him instead of executing him and takes him below decks to be tied up.
Mean.
John Reed, then, once everybody leaves the captain's quarters, sneaks into the captain's quarters, not a very well-guarded captain's quarters, writes the coordinates of Cutthroat Island onto a piece of paper, affixes the paper to a carrier pigeon, and sends it off into the storm. Morgan then tells Mr. Glasspool that she knows where the island is.
I found it, Mr. Glasspool. I fixed the island. I know where it is. It lies through the storm.
You risk the ship if you head for it.
I risk Dog if I turn back. Shorten sail all you want, Mr. Blair. We head straight through it.
This is a pretty good representation of approaching the inmost cave. You are braving severe weather, charging into the darkness. That was where I saw the end of Approach to the Inmost Cave.
Okay. I had everything after them taking Shaw below as part of Ordeal. But I can see how right up to that point you could put that in approach. I'll buy that. Ordeal. Our hero faces the ultimate test, often risking death to overcome their worst fear, sometimes actually appearing to die. So picking up where you left off, they're sailing into the storm. Mr. Blair has accepted the charge of not turning away and trying to avoid the storm. And then Scully leads some of their men below in a mutiny and has Morgan and her loyal crew members dropped into the sea in a longboat, leaving them to die.
At least give us a compass, Scully! You'll have no need of a compass where you're going! You're going nowhere but down!
Very James Bond villain sort of, I'm not actually going to kill you. I'm just going to leave you in an easily escapable situation. What? Shaw manages to escape the hold and dives into the stormy sea, swimming after them. So our heroes disappear from view. The storm appears to kill them.
Yes, their longboat hits a reef and capsizes.
Completing his betrayal, Scully goes to Dog and brings him Morgan's piece of the map. They land on the island. Dog sends his men to spread out and search the island. That's where I cut off Ordeal.
Grateful to you, Mr. Scully.
My pleasure.
But if you ever are disloyal to me the way you were to Morgan, it'll be my pleasure to cook you alive and eat you.
All right, that brings us to the ultimate boon or reward. Having faced their worst fear, the hero sees as the object of their quest. You're a little bit ahead of me. I've got Morgan and the crew awakening in the morning to sunny skies and calm waters, clinging to floating wood and portions of the wrecked longboat, with all but two of the crew members that were cast off with her. They have survived their ordeal of treading water in stormy seas. Mr. Glasspool points out an island nearby. Morgan turns around and just immediately says, "Oh, the Cliffs of Blood. Like, hey, we figured it out. We've never seen this before. We don't know why we think this is the Cliffs of Blood, but there it is. Look at this beautiful postcard island." So they decide they're going to swim to this island. They climb up onto the beach, use the two portions of the map in their possession to determine a reasonable place to begin their search for the treasure. They don't have the third part. They don't know exact location, but they're gonna make a go of it.
Yes.
As they climb higher into the island, they spot the Reaper and the Morning Star in the cove below. Dog has ordered his men to set up a camp on the beach. And as he takes a nap, we see somebody sneak into his hut. How are their buildings?
They constructed.
How is there a wooden... Anyhow, and cut the pouch around Dog's neck that contains the map free. Dog only wakes up when a tarantula scurries across his chest, and he wakes up, grabs the thing, and realizes that the pouch around his neck is no longer there, and immediately assumes that Morgan has stolen it.
Bitch stole my map! Find her! Or your own dick!
The commotion alerts Morgan and her folks as they are climbing around in the jungle as well. They see Shaw fleeing Dog's camp, though.
Yes.
And she says, let's see if we can find him. They search the jungle, eventually do find Shaw waist deep in quicksand. He attempts to negotiate a rescue. Get me out of here and I'll give you the map. And yeah, she says, I'm kind of holding all the cards here. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to give me the map, and then maybe we'll see about getting you out of that quicksand. A little back and forth, but Shaw finally relents. They drag him out of the...
It's a give me the whip, give me the idol standoff.
And it happens multiple times. Shaw is a negotiator. He negotiates his position multiple times throughout the film.
Yeah.
Now, with all three portions of the map in their possession, Morgan and Shaw locate the treasure of the Spanish gold ship deep within a cave that is halfway down a sea cliff. So they have to rappel down on ropes. It's there. It's really there. It's not this old sailor's tale. It's actual gold and jewels. They have literally found the treasure.
They have entered a cave and found the object of their quest.
The literal object of their literal quest, literally.
This is as good a place in this episode as any to say this is a great example about how following the hero's journey does not a good story make. Just because you fill the slots with scenes and plot points, guys, there still have to be characters that you care about. There still have to be surprises. You have to be dying to know what happens next. The stunts have to not be bad. So if ever you've heard it accused that the hero's journey is a template for good storytelling, let this film disabuse you of that notion.
It is a template for good story structure.
Yes.
Not storytelling.
Here, down the throat into the belly of gold, have gone we, and now it is time for us to seize our own treasure in the form of an alcoholic beverage.
Land ho! Dan, welcome to the Vogler Lounge here in the city of Port Royal. Before we have our swashbuckling tavern fight, what you be drinking?
I found a Jolly Roger cocktail recipe. An ounce of dark rum, an ounce of Galliano, which is a vanilla and herbal liqueur, a half ounce of apricot brandy,
Oof.
3 ounces of orange juice.
Oof.
Put them all into a cocktail shaker with ice, shake them up, strain them over ice into a glass, decorate with fruit slices if you wish. I had to do a lot of substitutions, though, with this one, Jeffrey, because for whatever reason, I could not find 3/4 of the ingredients of this recipe.
So you pulled a Jeff.
So I went with,
I didn't have
instead
those
of
other
dark
things.
rum, I had to go with Captain Morgan rum.
Ah, of course.
I mean, come on now. Instead of Galliano, which I couldn't find, I had to substitute Saint Germain elderflower liqueur.
Okay.
Instead of apricot brandy, which was nowhere. It wasn't at my grocery store, and it wasn't at Bevmo. No apricot brandy at Bevmo? What? That was weird. So I had to substitute, and this is the one I'm most concerned about, apple caramel brandy.
Okay.
That is my sub.
Okay.
3 ounces of orange juice, nailed that. I've got
good.
that.
You didn't use Sunny D.
So everything else, oh god,
You didn't sub Tang.
powdered high C. All right, so this is what it turns out to be. It's beautiful. Looks like orange juice. Well, I mean, it's 3 ounces of orange juice. But anyway, here we go with a Jolly Roger. Although I don't know that I can call this a Jolly Roger. It's more like a mildly amused Roger or something, because most of the ingredients are not really part of the recipe. Okay, the one thing I'm happy about is that the apple brandy has been significantly, the scent of it has been significantly reduced by the mixture here, because when I opened the bottle, it was just a blast of green apple smell in my face.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, this is going to overpower the whole thing. But with just a half ounce of it, it's not that bad. I can still smell it a little bit. There's a hint, but I'm not smelling much of anything else. I might be smelling the elderflower, the Saint Germain, which is what I substituted instead of Galliano. All right, let's see what this tastes like.
If you're listening, I wish you could see the blank look on Dan's face.
That is, well, it's like accessing registry. Beep, 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 beep. Loading taste dictionary. It's surprisingly good. I was pretty sure that because of all the substitutions I was making, and I am not a mixologist, so I don't know what the heck I was doing, it's actually pretty good. I'm pleasantly surprised with myself. I enjoy my mildly amused Roger. This is, I can taste more of the caramel of the brandy than the apple. The 3 ounces of orange juice, I think, really overpower the apple part of the brandy, which I've had this apple caramel brandy before neat, and it's just green apple in your face. So if you don't like the flavor of green apple, do not get this green apple caramel brandy, because that's the apple it is. It's not like red apple. Or
well, if you're combining it with the sweetness of caramel, I would think that that's the better choice.
There is a little bit of floral on the nose, so I'm guessing that's the elderflower. I don't know. I didn't even really get a good whiff of it when I was pouring it. Not bad. Not bad. I will enjoy this for the rest of the episode, and I might even make a second one. What do you have, Jeffrey?
I chose to make grog. Following the English conquest of Jamaica in 1655, rum replaced beer and brandy as the most popular drink. So this is time appropriate in that it contains rum, like your beverage, but after a little reading, I discovered that the term grog wasn't employed until the late 1700s. So this wouldn't have been something that the crew of the Morning Star or the Reaper would have drunk. But grog was essentially watered down rum, and then when they discovered that citrus would help to defeat scurvy, which was essentially a vitamin deficiency that plagued long-term sailors, they would add lime juice to it. So I made a grog. The recipe I found sounded so wrong. It just sounded like this is not going to be good at all. So it called for 1 ounce of lime juice, 1 ounce of rum, 1 ounce of brown sugar, and 4 ounces of water.
Okay.
1 ounce of brown sugar is nearly 7 teaspoons of brown sugar. And that sounded like a lot.
What?
So I've never done this before, but I made a batch of this and tasted it before I came, because I thought this is awful, and it was awful. It tasted like rotten lime juice. So I altered the recipe. I did not put 7 teaspoons of brown sugar in. So I put 2 teaspoons of brown sugar, and then I added another ½ ounce of rum. So this is 1.5 ounces of rum, 1 ounce of lime juice, 2 teaspoons of brown sugar, and 4 ounces of water.
Wow. Okay.
Watery brown, like you would. I think this looks authentic. It looks like watered down rum, like a yellowish, brownish color. Let me smell it. I smell rum and I smell lime. Mm-hmm. Oh, the rum I used. This was a gift from our friends Melmac, who are also supporters of the podcast. Lost Spirits Navy-style rum.
Okay.
Oak matured, 61% alcohol by volume. And it's a signed, numbered bottle. So this was a special gift that I have been piecing out. And as you know, rum is distilled from molasses. So it's got a sweet but somehow tarry kind of a taste. There's a little sweetness to it, but I think that's just the rum, because rum is molasses, and so it's sweet. Okay, here we go.
You don't think the brown sugar would...
Okay.
Better?
Okay,
Good.
Much better the way I made it. So
you didn't instantly vomit, so that's a good sign.
Wow, this is actually very refreshing. So the sweetness of the rum combined with the brown sugar, it's got a very sweet beginning, and then the lime juice sort of gets the sides of your tongue and you salivate, which makes you want to drink more, right?
Yeah.
So it didn't say to shake it, but based on the granule, the brown sugar, I wasn't just going to stir it.
Okay.
And the lime juice, so I shook it with ice, and then I poured it over ice, and it is quite refreshing. I'm glad I iced it. I'm sure the sailors would have drunk it. Sorry, verb conjugation moment there.
Drinked.
They would have drinked it at room temperature, but on ice, this is quite refreshing.
Don't typically carry ice on a pirate ship.
So I'm going to recommend 1 ounce of lime juice, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, 1.5 ounces of rum, 4 ounces of H2O. I might actually knock the lime juice down to like 1/2 ounce or 3/4 of an ounce. I would play with this recipe a little bit more, because it's very limey. Yeah, so there you go. I got this recipe from thedrinkblog.com, which I'm discovering is an interesting resource for recipes. And it's a historical kind of a naval ship drink.
Well, very cool. So are you naming this anything, since you've got your own recipe for it? It's just Hero's Grog?
How about, the Hero's Grog. I like that.
Grog of the Journey?
The Hero's Grog. I like that. That's good.
So we've got Hero's Grog and mildly amused Roger for our beverages here.
And shout out to my dad who just bought a golf cart and has converted it into a pirate golf cart. So he flies the Jolly Roger.
Sorry, what?
Yes, he bought a golf cart and he has turned it into a pirate vessel.
How do I see photos of this?
I'll send you some. When it's done, he's got a neighbor who's a woodworker, and they've bought these pieces of really fine birch, and they are making him. The trunk of this golf cart is going to be a treasure chest, so that all his golf accoutrement can go inside this. So they're going to get strapping and buckles and stuff. So when that's complete,
I can't wait to see
I will share it. But he's been sending me photos as the Jolly Roger. My dad's name is Roger, so he asked me. He's like, I want to make it a pirate ship. What should I name it? And I was like, are you kidding me? The Jolly Roger. And he's like, oh. So I'll have to send him your recipe.
That is awesome.
Ahoy! Let's dive into the stormy waters of Act 3.
Act 3 of the hero's journey begins with the road back. The hero is pursued by vengeful forces they disturbed when they seized the object of their quest. There's an element of the road back called magic flight, and there are two kinds of magic flight. If the hero entered the inmost cave with permission and the blessing of the gods, then supernatural forces aid him in return. But if the hero snuck in without permission and stole the treasure from the dragon, they now have to run for their lives. This is definitely the magic flight without permission. So Morgan and Shaw have found the treasure. Morgan says, I'm going to go get the guys so they can haul it up the cliff. Shaw, he says, I'll drag the chest to the entrance of the cave. So Morgan climbs back up the rope, gets to the top of the cliff, and finds her men gone. Now we know that her men, Blair and Glasspool, heard someone approaching, people they assumed were Dog's crew. So they said, we got to get out of here because if they find us, they'll find Morgan. Meanwhile, Shaw drags the treasure to the entrance of the cave. He's attached it to the rope and he's calling up to Morgan, hey, haul me up. But she's gone. So in the jungle, Dog's men emerge and ambush Morgan and drag her back to the cliff face. And they find Shaw hanging from the rope and they make a bargain. Give us the treasure, we'll give you Morgan. So they make that bargain, and then Dog pushes Morgan off the cliff, and Shaw catches her. She just happens to be within reach, and she grabs his leg, and he grabs her arm, and she's hanging by an arm and a leg. Dog and his men start to haul them up. You mentioned that Shaw's a negotiator. He says, hey, I think we should be 50-50 from this point on. And she says 60-40, and he says 50-50. So in this moment of mutual peril, they become partners for the first time. They agree explicitly, we're in this together, 50-50, and they let go of the rope and fall into the rocky waters below, maybe to their deaths. And then Dog has the second best line in this movie. He looks down and sort of shakes his head and says, love, who can explain it? And then tells his men, heave. It's a great moment of like odd humanity from Dog. And to me, it highlighted the real nature of pirates. He's a cruel, evil bad guy, but he's got a humanity about him. I love...
What? I didn't see it that way at all. He was being sarcastic AF. No, he was being a smart ass.
Oh, well, when I get to the...
He's not at all interested in...
When I get to the next line that I think is the best line in the movie, I'll add. But I think what I like about his performance is that he's, mustache twirling bad guy, but he has these other shades that make him more complex and more interesting than just that guy. So now we have a time cut. John Reed finds Shaw unconscious on the rocks, and it's a very awkward shot. Reed is splashing water on his face, and then he kind of looks up and to the right, and the camera pans to a place around a rock, which John Reed could not have seen from his angle. And so he goes around, and he finds Shaw unconscious and wakes him up, and Shaw's coughing. He's got blood coming out of his mouth. And he immediately wants to know, where's Morgan? And John Reed says, I'll take you to him. But instead, he doesn't take him to Morgan. He delivers him into the hands of Governor Ainsley.
Perhaps you're wondering how I come to be here. Little bird told me. Plump pigeon. Courtesy of Mr. Reed.
Ainsley has made an alliance with Dog. And Ainsley asks Reed, where's Morgan? And Reed says, I don't think she made it. That's where I drew the line. Because I think from there, we get into a quite literal resurrection and final battle.
Resurrection. The hero faces death one more time in a final battle or showdown. This time the danger is at the apex of the entire adventure. So I'm gonna roll back a little bit because my first bullet point is a little bit ahead in the story, but basically the British and Dog's crew strike camp, begin loading the treasure onto their ships. Ainsley, I had to roll back a little bit because I was like, okay, who's on what ship, and is there treasure on all three ships, or just that? Because Ainsley says that the treasure is being loaded on the British man of war, but obviously Dog has some, so they've split the treasure.
Well, no, Ainsley specifically says that they have to take the treasure back on the Reaper because it wouldn't be fitting to have a British man of war bring back treasure. That's why he rides with Dog. So he sends Trotter out on the Morning Star, but he rides on the Reaper with the treasure.
Okay, I guess I just misunderstood that line of dialogue. Yes, because Ainsley's going to ride with Dog to make sure he doesn't betray them. You by yourself,
right?
You foppish Ainsley as you characterized
him. It was
him.
confusing. And the other thing I wanted to point out is they're loading up obviously commercially grown bananas. I mean, bananas the size of your arm, these bananas. And the bananas don't grow like that naturally, and certainly not in Jamaica in 1688 or whatever it is.
Wow, I didn't know you were such a bananologist.
We had until we got two dogs, we had two banana trees in our backyard, and we would get about once every 2 years, we would get a nice crop of bananas. And there were maybe 6 inches, 7 inches long. But unless you get like a real legit, Chiquita banana farm, you don't get those giant bananas. Those weren't growing.
Safe to say probably that the growing conditions in Chino Hills, California are not the same as on a Caribbean island, given the proximity to the equator.
That's a fair point, but you were challenging my tarantula comment, so...
I didn't challenge it. I just said, I hope you're right for your sake. That wasn't me saying... That wasn't me saying, no, Jeff, you're wrong. Tarantulas exist everywhere.
What if tarantula's natural habitat is banana trees? Let's just say that's true. We're just going to leave that there. Probably true.
I think you're feeling a little sensitive. You're feeling like you're probably wrong, but you don't know enough to defend your position. So you're attacking me now.
See, this is the most passive-aggressive challenge I've ever had. That's very...
I'm just saying, you're talking about the growth size of bananas based on your experience growing bananas in your own yard in California versus... Okay, go, let's move on. Let's move on.
They literally had the Chiquita sticker on them. If you zoomed in close enough, you would have seen that.
All right, so what are we doing here? Okay, let's get back to the ships. Ainsley has joined Dog on the Reaper, and he has said that he's going to go write his royal pardon. And instead of arresting him for piracy, he is going to promote him to privateer for the crown. That sounds a lot better, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Very similar to what happened to Henry Morgan's career path. He was to be executed for piracy, but instead he was made lieutenant governor of Jamaica.
Well, this is where my first favorite line in this movie comes.
Okay.
As Ainsley is going down into the lower decks to write the pardon, one of Dog's crewmen says,
"Why do you let that preening swab live?"
And Frank Langella goes,
"I study him. When I become governor of Jamaica, I will need a certain style."
And then he practices how he might call
Trotter.
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 I love that.
That was your favorite line in the movie. That says an awful lot about your opinion of this film.
It's my favorite line in this movie because this is a man who doesn't just want money. He has an ambition to be in the upper classes. He wants to have real legitimate power. And we don't see that. He's just a bloody, but in that moment, and I know it's comedy, but he makes himself vulnerable in front of this crewmate, saying, I have aspirations beyond piracy, and even rehearses what it might sound like. It's funny, but it reveals another side of him that I really enjoyed, that enriched his performance to me.
All right.
Maybe I was digging for treasure in an otherwise barren movie, but that's what I found.
Okay, let us continue. Ainsley tasks Trotter with boarding the Morning Star with the other pirates.
Trotter!
And following the Reaper back to Jamaica. As the Morning Star weighs anchor, clinging to the anchor. How long was she clinging to the anchor underwater? We don't know. But emerges Morgan from the sea.
Great shot of the hero emerging from the water on an anchor.
The Morning Star is now underway, following the Reaper across the ocean. Morgan sneaks below, where her crew have been chained. She dispatches the 2 British guards and frees her crew.
I thought I should never see you again.
Yes, Mr. Glasspool, it's me. What do you say, men? Shall we take back our ship?
On your word, Captain.
And then Morgan and those loyal to her execute a reverse mutiny on Scully and his men, throw all of them overboard, not in a longboat. We might make mention. Morgan is a smarter pirate than Scully and knows that if I put him in a longboat, there's a chance he could survive and come get me, especially because it's a bright sunny day and there's no storm in sight.
Right.
And now we catch up to where I originally had the beginning of the resurrection, which is Morgan has now retaken command of her ship, ejected the mutineers, and is now closing on the Reaper. Ainsley looks back and sees the ship closing and assumes Trotter needs to speak with him, needs advice because he can't tie his own shoes without needing help, and he asks that the Reaper be slowed down. Dog, however, suspects that something is up, so he tells Mr. Snellgrave, powder the guns, but do it quietly so that we don't alert the crew of the Morning Star that we are suspicious of this act that they are taking.
Yeah.
He then asks Ainsley to allow him to hang Shaw from the yardarm immediately rather than waiting to reach Port Royal. He is trying to bait the Morning Star into revealing the fact that they are no longer being controlled by the British.
Yeah.
And Trotter. Ainsley says, well, that'd be amusing. You don't often see a hanging at sea, so he agrees to it. Morgan gets a rifle, and you can tell she wants to... Her relationship with Shaw is very tumultuous. First they're kissing, then she's gonna maroon him on the island. Now she's rescuing him from... it's just all over the place.
Shape-shifting, man.
She then looks back at her crew who's crouched down behind her cannons. My interpretation was she was thinking, is it worth exposing our ruse to try to free Shaw right now and potentially put all these men at risk?
Yes, I agree.
Blair does think it's worth that risk because he takes the shot and he shoots the hangman. The hangman falls dead. Shaw is able to free himself as suddenly both ships begin broadsiding, cannon show, and here's the big finale. Pirate movie, you've got to have 2 ships 20 feet from each other, emptying their guns into each other.
There's a long time where they're firing at each other where there's not much discernible damage for a while, and then all of a sudden, it gets really ugly.
Meanwhile, Shaw has made his way down into the Reaper's hold, located the pallet of treasure. It's all stacked up together and roped together all nice and neat. As he is trying to extract that, blow the lid off of one of the treasure chests, Morgan also makes her way down into the hold, ignites a cask of gunpowder, the blast of which knocks the treasure pallet into Shaw, pinning him to a support pillar. And as Morgan's men continue their fight on the Morning Star, Trotter rescues Mr. Blair from a British soldier. He says, "No future in the army, sir." So he has shifted shape and has now decided that it would be more fun to be a pirate.
Yes.
Morgan discovers Shaw as the ship begins to take on water, but Dog has found Morgan.
There you are, Morgan! Come to seek my treasure, have you? Don't move. I'll be right down to help you count it.
Let's finish this.
Come up!
Come up to Uncle!
By this time, the crew of the Morning Star have won the day. They have secured the prisoners aboard their ship, and they all look on as Morgan and Dog have taken their duel up the mast of the Reaper onto the yardarm. Dog disarms Morgan, and as she's hanging from a rope, he makes Darth Vader's offer. Join me, and we can rule the seas. And she goes full Luke, says no, and Dog cuts the rope. Down she falls into a very conveniently placed tarp or nice soft pit that she lands on and rolls down into the hold of the Reaper. Dog rappels down the rope into his own hold and has one final face-off with Morgan.
I'll give you this much, Morgan. You're harder to kill than your father.
She is injured. She can barely stand. She can't stand. She's like dragging herself across the floor and utters the worst line of the entire film when she whips the tarp off a cannon that is conveniently pointed at Dog, lights it, and says,
Bad dog.
Jeff, 6 writers were credited on this film. None of them said that's not going to play. The audience is not going to respond well to that line.
We started with I took your balls, and we end with bad dog. That's an Arnold line. He would have sold that. Bad dog.
Get down, bad dog. Yeah. You gotta steal the gold. The cannonball blasts not through Dog, which I think would be expected given his proximity to the cannon.
Yeah, it would tear him apart.
But it carries him.
Yeah, he like hugs it as it throws him through the ship.
As it launches him through his hold, through his captain's quarters, out the back of his ship and into the ocean.
Yeah, man.
Morgan then rescues Shaw finally. They escape from the Reaper via synchronized swan dive, just as the ship's stores of black powder ignite and the ship detonates like the Death Star.
It's absolutely. There's so much gunpowder on that ship. Like, oh my God.
As Shaw and Morgan are treading water among the floating wreckage of the Reaper, Shaw laments the loss of the treasure. He says, well, but at least you and I are alive together. Suddenly a barrel pops up, and Morgan informs him that this is a marker barrel, and on the other end is the treasure pallet, which proves that the treasure pallet weighs less than 3 tons.
Is that how buoyant a single barrel of water or single barrel of ale floating on the surface could displace?
If you remember the film Jaws.
Yeah. Oh.
Quint, played by Robert Shaw, no relation to William Shaw as far as we know, suggests that the shark is 3 tons.
That's a 20-footer.
25. 3 tons on him.
Fires 1 barrel into him, but the shark is able to drag that barrel under the water. So this single barrel does not get dragged under the water by the treasure pallet.
Huh. That's solid math. I'm going to go with that.
I'm just suggesting.
Movie math, solid.
Yeah.
I'm impressed. Well done.
And that's the end of Resurrection.
Return with the elixir. The hero, having won some precious treasure or reward, now returns to the ordinary world to share the spoils of battle. Morgan and the crew, now with the literal precious treasure, decide not to retire, as they could do with all of this wealth.
You're all rich men now. You're free to go your separate ways. You could buy a little cottage in Bermuda, drink chamomile tea on the porch.
But to return to their ordinary world of piracy. This time they're headed to Madagascar.
But that's in Africa.
Then we best get busy. Mr. Trotter, take the crow's nest watch for the next 12 hours.
Good as done, Mom.
Mr. Blair, prepare to come about. Steer south-southeast.
On to your stations, men. Prepare to come about.
After making that agreement, Morgan and Shaw retire to her cabin to consummate their renewed commitment to bloody, violent, ruthless piracy. Cut to End credit sequence. Thank you so much for joining us on this voyage. If you enjoy the show and you're interested in and able to support our podcast, please go to patreon.com/Heroes Journey Podcast and see if one of the tiers appeals to you.
Please share the Hero's Journey with your friends. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Like and subscribe, rate and review on your favorite podcast app. You can now find the Hero's Journey on Audible.
Thank you to all our patrons that make this show possible, including our demigod patrons: John Peterson Jr., Scott Sanford, Ricky Garvin, Jeff Scott, Joseph Wilbur, Michelle Calderon, Ami Garvin, Salathiel Jones, Jasmine and Pete Hudson, Mike and Susie Zarzana, Randy Sparks, and Justin Purvis.
As you were doing that, I was thinking, we should have come up with like awesome pirate names for all these folks.
Another time.
Boo, Dan. Epic fail. Special thanks to Taylor Jordan for composing the Hero's Journey theme music, and to Jason Dorff for our episode artwork. Links to both of their portfolios can be found on the About page of heroesjourneypodcast.com.
Cutthroat Island is copyright 1995 Cutthroat Productions LP. Thanks again for listening. Until next time,
Yar, journey on.
Trotter.